Good afternoon, grade 12s, and welcome to another telematics presentation on English home language. The last time we were with you, we were doing paper 1, and today we're going to be covering paper 2. My name is Matthew, and this is Sarah. And together we're going to be talking about the play, Othello, aspects of the play, and the kind of questions that you'll be expected to answer on the play, as well as the essays that you'll be expected to write. So I'm going to start off and talk about just give you a brief overview of the play, and then talk about contextual questions, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah. So you would have received a pack in which you have a copy of an extract of the play. It's from a past paper. Before we dive into the questions, I just want to speak to you a little bit about what's actually happening in the play. You would have, I'm sure by now, be familiar with the basic fact of who the characters are and what's happening and where it's happening. And so I'm going to move very quickly through this part, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm not sure how far all of you will be with the play, and you may not have read to the end, quite possibly, but we're going to talk about it as if you have, so hopefully that won't spoil the plot as such, but it's important that we're able to talk about the play in its entirety. So let's start off, and allow me to just give you a bit of an introduction to the play. Othello is one of Shakespeare's most interesting plays, for the simple fact that his central character, central hero, is non-European. There's been a long debate about Shakespeare and how racist he is or he isn't. And in Othello we have a Moor as the hero. And that's the term that Shakespeare uses to refer to Othello. That's how the characters in the play refer to him, as the Moor. His race is debatable. People have discussed exactly where he's from. But what we do know is that when Shakespeare uses the term the Moor, he's referring to someone probably from the northern area of Africa. So we have an African hero at the center of this play, which is unusual for Shakespeare. And rather than focus on race in the play and get too caught up in the arguments about that, what I want to focus on in talking about the play is what I think we really do need to understand and what we do need to pin down. And that is how Iago is able to manipulate Othello into believing his wife is guilty of an affair. In other words, what turns an obviously loving husband, and Othello is a loving husband at the beginning of the play, into a man who is prepared to kill his wife. It's that transition from right at the beginning of the play, when Othello is willing to risk everything, in a sense, to marry Desdemona. He goes against her father's wishes, he marries her in secret, and he goes against whatever everyone else thinks. But at the end of the play, the same woman who he marries in secret and gives his life to, he ends up taking her life. So we're wanting to see, how does this happen? What causes him to change his mind and to change what he thinks about her so dramatically? Let's start by talking about setting. We're going to get to the characters and those questions that I've just raised in a moment. But a helpful place to start is in setting. In other words, where is the play set and when is it set? You'll know that the play is set in 2 locations. The first act takes place in Venice, and the whole play is set within the framework of Venetian society. The people in the play are Venetian. It's as if, for example, you had to go to London and you had to meet a whole group of South Africans in London. They're still South African, and so everything's happening within South African society. Even though the last 4 acts of the play happen in Cyprus, which is an island off the coast of Turkey, the people there are still Venetian. It's all happening within the context of Venice. Let me give you an idea of that by referring to a map of the Mediterranean. So this is the Mediterranean Ocean. If you have a look at it, this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the north of Africa over here. We've got Morocco, Algeria, Libya. These are all the countries as they are known today. We've got Spain over there, and France and Italy. And then we have Venice, which is located right up here at the top, in the top of Italy. And so in those days, you didn't talk about Italy so much as you talked about Venice, which was essentially a country in and of itself. And over here, at the second red circle, we've got Cyprus, and we've got what is present-day Turkey over here. So Venice was located there, but it controlled Cyprus, the island of Cyprus there, and Cyprus was very important to it. Now, the relevance of Venice, and I'm not going to talk about this for much longer, but the important thing that we need to know about Venice is that we could compare it to modern-day London or New York. It's a city where you've got a lot of people passing through, you've got a lot of money passing through, a lot of trade, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different languages. It was a very mixed society, was Venetian society, and Venice the city. So it's that setting in which we've got the play taking place. Into the setting, we've got the following characters. First of all, Othello. I've spoken to you a bit about him, and just touched on the fact that he's from Africa. What we need to remember about Othello is that he is an outsider to Venetian society. He's got this fascinating life story where he talks about being stolen or kidnapped and put into slavery, and then he escaped, and he spent most of his life as a soldier. All of this we find out in the first act in scene 3. And somehow, and we're never told how, but somehow he manages to work his way to the top of the Venetian military, to the point where he is a general in the Venetian army, and he's a very respected general. He's regarded as an excellent soldier, one of their best. We then have Brabantio, who is a rich old nobleman. He's a Venetian nobleman. He's very rich, he's very powerful, and he has a beautiful young daughter called Desdemona. Now, Desdemona and Othello are at the center of the love story in Othello. She falls in love with him, he falls in love with her, and they get married in secret. Add to this another character by the name of Rodrigo. Rodrigo is a rich young Venetian nobleman who is desperately in love with Desdemona. At times it seems as if he almost can't think straight. You know, he can't sort of get his head around what he needs to. And so he spends a lot of time with Iago, telling Iago how desperate he is for Desdemona. And Iago keeps on promising him that he's going to get him Desdemona and get Desdemona away from Othello. We also have Michael Cassio, who is Othello's lieutenant, his second in charge, which means that if Othello was in a battle and he was killed, Cassio would take over. So if Othello's not there, for whatever reason, if he's dead or busy, then Cassio takes over. So it's a very high-ranking position, that of lieutenant. And then, grade 12s, we have Iago. Iago is absolutely crucial to this play. He appears in all but 3 scenes, I think. If I remember correctly, he's in every single scene of the play except for 3. He appears in the play more often than Othello does. We find out very early on in the play that Iago hates Othello. That's the word that he uses. He hates Othello. And he hates Othello for 2 reasons. Number 1, he expected to get the job that went to Michael Cassio. You see, Iago wanted to become the lieutenant. Instead, he was given a much more managerial or administrative role. He's almost like Othello's secretary. It's what is called as ensign or as ancient. So Iago doesn't get what he wants. Instead, he gets the sort of the more humiliating job, and Cassio becomes a lieutenant. So that's the first reason that Iago is angry at Othello and hates him. The second reason is that he says he suspects Othello of sleeping with his wife, Emilia. But he doesn't know for sure. But for these 2 reasons, and also because Iago there's something about him that is cruel, he sets out to destroy Othello's happiness. And he constantly uses those around him to achieve his plans. Iago's a bit like a puppet master, or if you've ever played a computer game, he's sitting at the controls and he's controlling what's going on there. So he's always in control. He's always manipulating and moving people. And this is all because of those 2 reasons. There are 3 things that I think are helpful to remember about Iago. Number 1, Iago is never honest with anyone in the play. He is never completely honest. He's always telling a story. He's always telling a lie. He's always presenting himself as something that he isn't. So no one in the play can trust him. The only time that we get close to understanding what Iago is really about is when he speaks to the audience. because that's him speaking his thoughts. But even then, it's sometimes it's sometimes not entirely clear exactly what Iago is on about. But that first point, he's never honest with anyone else in the play until the end. But even then, he says, I'm not going to speak anymore, so he doesn't say anything more. The second point about Iago is that everyone thinks that he is his or her friend. I want you to, as you go through the play, look how many times the word honest is used to describe Iago. It's quite shocking, actually. It's so surprising. Everyone says honest Iago, honest Iago, honest Iago. So everyone thinks that he's their friend. Everyone thinks that he's being honest, but he's honest with no one. And that's crucial to the play. And then thirdly, Iago's manipulation of Othello is incredibly effective. He manages to get right inside of Othello's head. And he, like I said, he manages to turn this loving husband into this jealous, murdering man. Iago convinces Othello that that Michael Cassio has slept with Desdemona. And that's really what the play is, so much of the play is about, is how does Iago do this? How does he manage to get inside of Othello's head? Here's a point that's worth remembering. It's not until the beginning of the third act that Iago actually speaks to Othello and gets him to start doubting Desdemona. In the first and second acts, Iago is just setting things up. He manages to get Cassio fired, but he doesn't actually say anything to Othello. It's only in the third act that he actually starts to work on Othello's mind. And even within the space of one scene, he's got Othello doubting that Desdemona has been faithful to him. And we ask the question, how is he able to do that so effectively? Let's talk about themes for a moment. We've talked about the setting, talked about the characters. With regards to Othello, there are all sorts of things we can say about the play, and there are all sorts of themes that we can explore. Let's look at just three, and there are almost certainly more, but let's look at these three. There's the theme of love and betrayal, the fact that Othello loves Desdemona, but ultimately feels betrayed by her. We also have, similar to that, we have Iago, who believes that Emilia has betrayed him with Othello. So we've got love and betrayal, and also Desdemona and Emilia have a conversation about this. But it's the two ideas which go very strongly together, that you can't feel betrayed by someone who you don't love. And the fact that Othello loves Desdemona so much makes his feeling of betrayal so much deeper and so much more tragic. The second theme that we could look at is trust and suspicion. Okay, so who does Othello trust? He trusts Iago and is suspicious of Cassio and of his wife. So we will ask the question, why does Othello trust Iago so much? And this is, I think, just fascinating. One of the reasons we could look at why Othello trusts Iago and doubts everyone else, Iago gives us a clue earlier on in the play where he says, I have fought with Othello. Othello has seen me fight. He's seen me be a soldier, whereas he's never seen Cassio fight. And he's spent his entire life with soldiers, not with women like Desdemona. So who does he naturally trust? He trusts the man that he spent most of his life with, Iago. He trusts soldiers whom he's seen fight. And so that might explain why he's not as quick to trust Cassio and why he doubts Desdemona. The third theme that we could look at is that of appearance versus reality. And this is really all about Iago. Iago appears, as I said, to be everyone's friend, but in reality, he's not. He serves himself. He says so. I only serve myself. I don't serve anyone else. So we've got these three themes: love and betrayal, trust and suspicion, appearance versus reality. And these are really important to be familiar with because they help you to understand the play and they help you to understand what's going on and how the characters are interacting. And Great Souls, at this point, can I stress to you that there's no substitute for going back to the play and reading the play and really spending time going through it. And a helpful thing, I think, would be to take some time, if you and some friends are really wanting to do well in your paper too, take some time to read through the play together. You'll do work in class, but if you sit down and you go through it together, particularly if you've got a good version of the play, you can really sort of talk through a lot of this together and figure out a lot of what's going on. And here at this point, I want to stress something which I think is really important to remember. It's something that we have to keep in mind whenever we do Shakespeare, and it's this. Othello is a play. It was something that Shakespeare wrote in order to be performed on a stage. So whenever you're reading the play, your mind always needs to be going towards thinking, what does this look like on a stage? What does it look like when the characters say the words? What are their tones of voices? What actions are they performing? What movements are they doing? What are their facial expressions? Try and imagine what's happening in the play as much as possible. So there's a point at which Othello strikes Desdemona. Try and imagine what Desdemona, the expression on her face. Try and imagine the tone of his voice. This is something that wasn't meant just to be written. It was meant to be seen on the stage. Let's now talk about some of the questions that you're going to be asked when it comes to the play. If you have a look in your booklet, you'll see that there is an extract from the play, and there are some questions on that. And there are three important terms that I want to focus on with you. Some of them, they're similar to the terms that we talked about with paper one, or at least one of them is. But these are the kind of words that come up in the questions that you're asked. And there are three which I think will be very helpful, or three sets of them at least. The first one is context. Okay, and we're going to look at a question that asks you to place something in context. And you must understand what the word context means. It's really important. The second term is irony. Grade 12s, in terms of understanding Othello, I don't think you can understand the play unless you understand what is meant by the term irony. And we're not going to go into the different levels of irony and the different kinds of irony, but you need to understand what the word irony means. And again, we're going to look at that in a moment and how that works. And then finally, the third sort of set of terms is comment on or critically discuss. And I'm going to touch on what those mean in a moment. So let's have a look at some of the contextual questions. Why don't you turn in your booklet? I think it is on page 12 is the extract. And Sarah and I are going to read this for you. It's an extract involving Cassio and Iago, and we just think it'll be helpful for you to hear it. Bearing in mind this is a play, people would have heard these words, and so let's read it for you. And won't you follow page 12? This is with Cassio and Iago.
Okay, I'm going to be reading Cassio, and Matthew's going to be Iago. You advise me well.
I protest in the sincerity of love and honest kindness.
I think it freely, and betimes in the morning I will beseech the virtuous Desdemona to undertake for me. I am desperate of my fortunes if they check me here.
You are in the right. Good night, Lieutenant. I must to the watch.
Good night, honest Iago.
And what's he then that says I play the villain, when this advice is free I give, and honest, probable to thinking, and indeed the course to win the moor again? For 'tis most easy the inclining Desdemona to subdue in any honest suit. She's framed as fruitful as the free elements, and then for her to win the moor were to renounce his baptism. All seals and symbols of redeemed sin, his soul is so infettered to her love, that she may make, unmake, do what she list, even as her appetite shall play the god with his weak function. How am I then a villain to counsel Cassio to this parallel course directly to his good? Divinity of hell. When devils will their blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, as I do now. For while this honest fool plies Desdemona to repair his fortunes, and she for him pleads strongly to the moor, I'll pour this pestilence into his ear, that she repeals him for her body's lust. And by how much she strives to do him good, she shall undo her credit with the moor. Let's have a look at the first question, because this really is a good question to ask first up. 14.1, it says place the extract in context. Now, grade 12s, your instinct when answering questions either in paper 1 or in paper 2 should really be to, as soon as you've read the question, move your eyes across to the mark allocation, because that'll tell you how much you need to say. You'll see here that this is for 3 marks, where you have to place the extract in context. What it means to place something in context is to identify what happens before, what happens during, and what happens after. That's a very simple way of thinking about context. What has led up to this extract, what happens in the extract, and what's going to happen as a result of it. So if we have a look at this extract here, and you're being asked to place it in context, you need to say, well, what has led to this extract happening? Okay, you will know, if you've read this act, that what has led up to this is that Iago manages to get Cassio drunk, and he gets Rodrigo to get into a fight with Cassio, and in the process Cassio ends up injuring someone very important, and he's fired. Othello has just fired Cassio. Now, I've given you a lot of detail there. You could probably just say Cassio has just been stripped of his position by Othello. Okay, you probably want to avoid using the word fired, because that's not what they would have done in those days. But if you say he lost his position as lieutenant and Othello has taken that away from him, that would be acceptable.
Plus, fired is a very colloquial word, and you need to remember that when you are answering these questions, you're writing a formal exam. So you need to be as formal as possible. So don't use terms that you would use in everyday conversation with your friends. Okay.
Yes. So don't make the mistake that I've just made. We've got Cassio, who's just been removed from his position. Othello has disgraced him. That's what happens before. What happens during the scene? Well, Iago gives Cassio advice on how to get his position back. And he says to Cassio that he should go and speak to Desdemona, who should then speak to Othello. So that's before he's lost his position. During, he's been given advice on how to get back his position. And then after, what happens as a result? Well, we know that because Desdemona appeals to Othello for Cassio, it looks as if she's interested in Cassio romantically. And it looks as if she's having an affair with Cassio. So what happens before? He loses his position. What happens during? He gets advice on how to get his position back. What's the result of that? It makes Othello jealous because Desdemona keeps on referring to Cassio, and he thinks that she's having an affair with him. So if you were to cover those three, it says places extract and context for 3 marks. You talk about before, during, and after. You've really done what you need to do in terms of showing that you understand where this extract is in the play. In grade 12s, I think we mentioned it with the paper 1, these questions are an invitation to you to show what you know about the play. And you want to show, look, I've read this play, I understand what's happening in it. So when you give me this extract, I can tell you what's happening. So don't just give the bare minimum. If you write 1 line for a 3-mark question like this, you're not going to get your marks. I guarantee you. You've got to take the time to answer the question fully. And a question about placing it in context is really you should get 3 out of 3 every single time for that. Then 14.2 says, discuss the irony of Iago's advice. And there's this term irony that's so important. And irony can be explained in a number of ways. Let's go with this for the time being. Irony is when you think something is happening or something appears to be happening, but in reality something else is happening. So you think or something appears to be going on, but in reality it's something else. Okay, so it's the whole appearance versus reality. If you don't understand irony in Othello, you're going to struggle to understand the play, because there is irony throughout. Every single time Iago speaks to someone, there is irony. There is him saying one thing, but we know that the reality is something different. So what is the irony of Iago's advice that he gives to Cassio? Cassio says, you advise me well. What's the irony? He appears to be advising him well, but in reality he's giving him very bad advice. He's trying to trick him. Line 10, Iago says, this advice is free I give, and honest. It would appear that this is free and honest advice that he's giving, but in reality, he's trying to trick Cassio. So can you see how the irony works? It's what does it look like, but what is it actually? Okay? So you need to, when talking about Iago, you need to be, that word irony always needs to be in the back of your head, because you're almost certainly going to need to use it at some point. Does that make sense? Have I covered that all, or is there anything that we could?
No, definitely. I also think that the way you could think of irony is the opposite of what the character's expecting to happen. So Cassio's expecting that the advice is true, good advice, But the opposite is true. In fact, it's really bad advice because it's going to inevitably, well, in the end, lead to Desdemona's death. So that's what you need to know about irony. So either the opposite of your expectations or the appearance is different from the reality. If you use those types of words in your answer, so if you actually say, well, it appears to Cassio this, but in reality that, then your marker is going to see that you understand the theory behind irony. So that's already going to give you some marks there.
Yeah, very good. Let me finish off by referring to the final important term, which is to comment on or critically discuss. And again, grade 12s, think of the question as an invitation to show what you know. So for example, in 14.4, it says, refer to lines 23 to 26, where Iago, once you find it there, Iago says, well, you don't have line numbers, but it's at the bottom of page 12 where it says divinity of hell. It's where, let's make sure that I get this correct. It's where Iago says this, divinity of hell. When devils will their blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, as I do now. Okay, and so you're asked to critically discuss how the paradox in these lines reveals Iago's true nature. Okay, and what Iago's saying in that is that when evil people, or as he refers to devils, when they want to do the worst acts, their blackest sins, they at first put on their heavenly shows. When they want to do the worst, commit their worst sins, they look their best so that no one will believe what they're actually doing. Appearance, reality, irony. Can you see how it's working the whole way through the play? You're being asked to critically discuss this. And when it says critically discuss, it means talk about this. So refer to the passage in some detail. Again, this is for 3 marks. So you want to talk about, again, what is being said there. It says critically discuss. It's an invitation to look at those 3 lines and to show that you've understood what they mean. So don't just give a 2-line answer. Critically discuss means come, show us what you know. Read the lines carefully and explain them in as much detail as you can. Obviously don't spend 10 minutes on one question, but don't write 2 lines either. You want to give a good chunk of time to that. I'm going to stop there with the contextual questions and hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk to you about the literary essay. I hope that gives you something to think about with regards to contextual questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I see that quite a few of you out there are sending us some WhatsApps, which is really nice to see. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that they're all asking about the Crucible and Animal Farm. We're not going to cover those today, but the kind of things that we are looking at are valuable skills that you can apply to any of the novels or dramas that you're doing. So the fact that Matthew has just looked at irony, what putting in context means, and what critically discuss means, those are terms that are going to come up no matter which novel or drama you're doing. So while I'm afraid that I am going to talk about an Othello essay, what I'll really be discussing is how to put together a good essay. So hopefully you can still come away with some tips on, even if you're writing your essay on Animal Farm, or if you're writing your essay on The Crucible, how you can put that together in a good way. All right. So in your pack, from page 8, I believe it is, you've got some notes which we've actually presented to you before in a previous telematics session, and it's about putting together a good essay. And in fact, this example from page 8 to page 11 uses Animal Farm. So hopefully if you are studying Animal Farm, that'll be of benefit to you. But the crucial thing that I want to talk about today is I want to give you some examples of good paragraphing. Because it's very easy to talk about in theory, oh, your paragraph must look like this. But it's much more difficult to really put it into practice. So first, let me just remind you of how to make a good paragraph for yourself. You need to first really look at the question very carefully and unpack that question and decide what bits of the play or bits of your novel will help you prove your point. Then you need to decide which points you're going to use. So I'm going to use 6 points, and those will form the 6 paragraphs of my essay. I hope you're following along. This is all coming from your booklet on page 9, page 8 to 11, in fact. From that, each point you need to prove your point. Remember, you're being a lawyer. You need to show your marker that you've read the play and that you have some evidence from that play or novel that proves your point. And then you need to explain how that evidence works. So if I could just ask Matthew to bring up our examples, then I can work through a few with you. And I'm going to be looking at a couple of topics from Othello, and we'll sort of discuss those topics too as we go along. All right. So the first topic we're going to be looking at is a topic called leaders versus followers. Leaders versus followers is an important theme in Othello because it's talking about how Othello, who is meant to be the leader, is actually being led by Iago, who should be the follower. So this is one example of a paragraph, and it reads, Othello also sees himself as a leader in his marriage. Despite being utterly in love with Desdemona, he expects her to follow him and obey his commands without questions. Here are examples of this throughout the play, with simple comments like, come, let's to the castle, or direct orders such as, get you to the bed on the instant. This was typical of the times. Men were seen as dominant, and women were expected to obey and follow their husbands. Now, what I've done with that paragraph is I've actually split it into our sections. So all the parts that are yellow would be the point that this writer is trying to prove. This writer is trying to prove that Othello is a leader in his marriage as well as in the army. Then what I've underlined is the evidence. So this writer has done quite well. They've found good evidence of how he is a leader, and especially with his instructions to Desdemona, he is her leader or her boss, if you will. And then I've explained it at the end. The writer has explained it at the end, tying how those two are, how the evidence works. So it says this was typical of the times. Men were seen as dominant and women were expected to obey and follow. So that might seem quite complicated to someone sitting in the classroom right now. But what I'm trying to point out to you is that you need to look at every little paragraph almost as an argument by itself. Each little paragraph is a mini argument, and then you're going to build them together to create your entire essay. Okay, so that's one example. Now, in your resource book, I've laid it out that you always say point, what your point is, then you put your evidence, and then you explain how your evidence links, and then you link back to the introduction. But you'll see in the example that I've shown you, it doesn't always have to work exactly in that order. So this has gone, the yellow is the point, so it's split up with a little bit of extra information, which you don't really need. And then I've got my evidence, and then I've got my explanation. All right, so that's how that one's worked. If we look at our next one, which is also on the topic leaders versus followers, this one works quite similarly, and this one is quite straightforward in terms of the order. We've got our point, then you can see we've got underlined our evidence, and then we've got an explanation which links it to the whole question. So again, we're talking about leaders versus followers. It says, Othello is a leader through an official position. He is a highly respected and seemingly irreplaceable general of the Venetian army. Now, hopefully, if you've read the play, you'll agree with that. And now here comes our evidence. And Iago points out that another of his fathom they have none, which means they don't have anyone quite of Othello's caliber. On first introduction, Othello appears righteous, rational, polite, devoted, and conscientious, qualities that are highly suited for a man of his leadership status. And now they've gone on to another explanation. It is Othello's own insecurities, immense trust in Iago, and fear of embarrassment that allow him to be emotionally and subconsciously manipulated into following Iago. So let's just talk about this idea of leaders and followers, because it is quite central to our play. We have Othello, who is a general, and he is supposed to be the man in charge. He's the most important. And then he's got all of these people around him who are supposed to follow him. Most of all, Iago. Iago is supposed to be his standard bearer, his ancient, his ensign. He's supposed to be protecting Othello's name and standing for Othello. So he's really, on appearance, supposed to be a follower. But in Act 3, the roles completely reverse. And we see how Othello becomes the follower because he is completely manipulated by Iago into believing whatever Iago tells him, and in fact doing what Iago encourages him to do. And so he, of course, then falls from his leadership position. The same can be said of Emilia. Emilia is meant to be a follower. She is her husband's wife. She's meant to just follow him and do whatever he says, which she does do when she takes Desdemona's handkerchief. But by the end of the play, she shows herself to be a bit of a leader because she comes out and she tells the true story of what has happened. So it's quite interesting if you look at those parts. All right, then let's look at another topic that we've got here. A very popular topic that could come up is Desdemona is self-assured, are the women weak and submissive? This is quite a controversial question because in Othello, Desdemona seems weak in many ways, but she also is very strong in other ways. And the same can go for Emilia. So here's an example of a paragraph from this essay. Desdemona is self-assured and truthful speaker in the play. Her love for the Moor is proclaimed when she justifies her decision to marry Othello. She shows independence by marrying a man of a different race, age, and culture from her own. This act is against her father's beliefs. She breaks the stereotype that women cannot express their opinions in Shakespearean times. So you see, what we had there is our first point. What did this writer want to say? They wanted to say, no, Desdemona is not weak and submissive. She's in fact self-assured and truthful. And so that's their point. Then they've gone and they've found all the little bits of evidence. So the fact that she marries someone against her father's wishes, the fact that she stands up and explains it to her father in front of the Duke and all the senators is also very brave. And so we put in our evidence, and then next you just explained it by saying the last 3 lines, she breaks the stereotype that women cannot express their opinions, which is saying that they're not submissive. Okay. I hope that by looking at some of these paragraphs, you're seeing how you might be able to do this in your own writing. It's not nearly as frightening when you actually get down to it and if you plan it properly. Okay. So, now here is a very touchy topic and quite controversial, and I know Matthew touched on it briefly, but this is quite a popular essay topic. And the basic question is Othello a racist play? So let's just step away from the paragraph for a second, and let's just discuss whether Othello is in fact a racist play. There are so many racist remarks made in Othello. It's very true. Iago, Rodrigo, Brabantio, they all say really terrible things about Othello connected with his race, connected with the fact that they always use the word black, which, remember, just means not white. So they're not really sure we are not really sure today whether he was meant to be African or perhaps of Arabic descent. But in the end, Othello is, well, not in the end, in the beginning of the play, Othello is seen as valiant, he's seen as righteous, calm, not aggressive, and he's seen as a very good speaker. So those attributes that we've given to us, that Shakespeare's given to Othello, completely refute the idea that the message of the play is racist. While there are racist characters, the way Othello himself is portrayed is far from racist. And some people might question, well, at the end, Othello is shown to be violent, and perhaps this is meant to be a comment on his race. But what leads him to that violence is, in fact, Iago, and it's jealousy. So it's got nothing to do with an innate violence within Othello. So that's quite important to look at when you are looking at the play. So here's an example of a paragraph from this topic. And it says, the point is of this, throughout Othello, there are many racist remarks uttered about the character. The villainous Iago shows his blatant disrespect for Othello by describing him as an old black ram. Rodrigo confirms this racial stereotype by describing Othello as thick lips. Despite these prejudiced and vulgar terms, Othello's reputation is not tarnished, as men like the Duke respect him greatly. The Duke tells Brabantio in Act 1 that if virtue no delighted beauty lack, his son-in-law is far more fair than black. This disproves all prior racist descriptions of Othello, and so the play's message is not one of racism. All right. So what I've done there, again, you can see the point is really split over the beginning and the end of the paragraph. The idea that, yes, there are racist remarks, but it doesn't make the play racist. And then all the evidence lies in the middle of the paragraph. So you don't necessarily have to go point, evidence, explain every time, because it might come off as a little bit repetitive. So you can change how you structure your paragraphs if you would like to. Okay, let's look at another one on that topic. And here's a very good introduction, because introductions are the most important part of your essay. So we're going to look at this, and then I will examine it in detail. So it says, the stereotypes of black people as being savage, violent, and inferior in terms of society are not reinforced in Shakespeare's Othello. That comes directly from the question. Although stereotypes are used, they are done so effectively to create irony, to give Othello a reason for insecurity, and to make Othello's downfall as a tragic hero evident. The stereotypes do not make Othello a racist play. And I want to show you this introduction because it's an excellent, excellent introduction. When you are writing and planning your literary essays, you should actually leave the introduction to last. Don't you agree, Matthew? After that you have done all your hard work and decided where you're going to go, then go back and write the introduction. I know it sounds very back to front, but that is really how you get an effective introduction. And what your introduction needs to do is, first, it needs to somehow mention the question. So it needs to bring parts of the question in. It needs to make a statement. Do you agree or do you not agree? So is it true or is it not true? But now this is the step that most writers leave out. It also needs to outline how you are going to prove that. So if we go back to this introduction, we can see that the bits of yellow are parts of the question. The stereotypes of black people as being savage, violent, inferior in terms of society are not reinforced in Shakespeare's play. If we look at the orange right at the end, this is the agreement or the disagreement. The stereotypes do not make Othello a racist play. And in the middle, what I've underlined is this writer has gone back, looked at their argument, and they've summarized it very briefly. So, although stereotypes are used, they are done so effectively to create irony, to give Othello a reason for insecurity, and to make Othello's downfall as a tragic hero evident. So, that person has laid out for themselves 3 things. Stereotypes are used to create irony, give Othello a reason for insecurity, and to make his downfall evident. And so this person is actually already given the structure of their essay, because those are now the 3 topics they will discuss in the following paragraphs. And it's really important that you do that in your introduction. Here's another example of a very good introduction. It's on the same topic, so we're getting very used to this topic now. In Othello, Shakespeare, through the character of Othello, is able to defy the racial stereotypes that existed in Elizabethan times. During this period, people of color were associated with savagery and violence. They were believed to be inferior in terms of class and position. While characters such as Brabantio, Rodrigo, and Iago reinforce these stereotypes with their words, Othello is able to combat them with his gentle and valiant nature. Now, this writer has done it the other way around. So you'll see that they've done the outline of what they're going to talk about at the end of the introduction. So they've started with their point. No, it defies racial stereotypes. Then they've mentioned a little part of the question. And then they've said to us, well, this is how I'm going to show you. Because while characters such as Brabantio, Rodrigo, and Iago reinforce the stereotypes with their words, that's going to be one part of their discussion, Othello is able to combat them with his gentle and valiant nature, and that'll be the other part of the discussion. And if you can manage to write an introduction like that, it'll really impress your marker, and it's just a really good footing to start your essay on. But please, you need to do your planning really, really carefully in order to write an introduction like that. So while I know the pages in your book, pages 8 to 11, are about Animal Farm, they actually are about how to plan an essay. So while this is on an Animal Farm topic, this is about planning. So you can use any topic, whether it's on the Crucible, Othello, Great Gatsby, and use these sets of rules to write a good essay, okay? And to plan your essay. And once you've planned it well like this, you can then write that effective introduction.
I think just to pick up on something that Sarah was saying there, and just to reinforce it, in terms of a literary essay, again, it's helpful to think of the essay as an invitation to show that you've read whatever you've read, be it Othello or Animal Farm or The Crucible, and to show that you've read it and you've done what you can to understand it and you've really got into it. But with that though, something which I think is worth mentioning every time we do a literary essay, when we say it's an invitation to show what you know, it's not an invitation just to show that you know the story and just to retell the story. You always have to assume that whoever's reading your essay has also read the text that you're talking about. So if you've read The Crucible, know that the person who's reading your essay has also read The Crucible. Okay, so you don't have to tell them the story again, because that's not the point. What you want to show is that you've understood what the play is about. So for example, if you're doing something on The Crucible, you want to show that you know that the play is not just about the time period in which it's set, but it's also about the hunt for communists in sort of mid-20th century America. So you want to show that you know that that's what the play is talking about. If you're doing Animal Farm, you want to show that you've read the novel and you understand that it's not just about animals on a farm, but it's about something more than that. So when you do your literary essay, it's not about trying to mention as many things as you can think of about the plot. But as Sarah's been saying, you want to take an aspect of it and talk about it in more depth. So, for example, with regards to Animal Farm, don't just mention that, Napoleon is meant to represent Stalin, okay? You want to say, well, Napoleon represents Stalin because of his character, and show that you've understood who Napoleon's character is. What is Napoleon about? Like what makes him like Stalin? You don't just want to say, well, animalism was all about socialism or communism. You want to show in what ways are they similar, and show that you've really thought for yourself. Again, there's no substitute for reading your text again. So if you've gone through the crucible in class, by the time you get to writing your paper 2, I would say you want to have read it again, and that's where a study group can be very helpful, and you can talk about it together. Perhaps I could just talk a little bit about dramatic irony.
Yes, I think that's important.
Would that be all right? Let's remember I said to you that we get different types of irony, and just very briefly, you get what's called, and I'm writing it up here, and hopefully you can get to see it. You get what's called verbal irony, situational irony, okay, and then you get what's called dramatic irony. Okay, and let's just focus on that for the time being. Don't worry about these two for the time being. It's just important that you know that there are different types of irony. Dramatic irony functions very, very simply, and so hear this and keep this in mind, because I think this is going to help you. Dramatic irony occurs when the audience knows something that a character or characters don't. Remember, it's about appearance and reality. So it's where you've got something appears a certain way to a character, but the audience knows that in reality it's different. So when Iago speaks to Othello and says, I'm being honest with you, Othello believes that. That's what it appears like to him, but the audience knows better. Okay, and obviously in Animal Farm, it appears as if it's just a story about animals, but the audience know that it's about something far more than that. It's about George Orwell criticizing communism and criticizing political leaders who just enrich themselves and get fat like the pigs do. In the Crucible, we could say, look, the play appears to be about one thing, but it is actually about something else. And the playwright is trying to make a comment about, 20th century America, and that's what that's a dramatic irony. So it's where the characters don't know something that the audience does. So that's very helpful to keep in mind with regards to dramatic irony. Yeah.
I think also, as long as you know that you are looking at, as long as you understand those terms, because there's nothing worse than getting into an exam and not understanding the question, which is why Matthew was focusing on the ideas of context, comment on, critically discuss, and irony. Because if you don't know what the question is asking you, you won't be able to answer. So just take some time out and make yourself familiar with the way questions are asked. Do lots of past papers, have a look at the memos, they're all available online, and really make yourself familiar with what your marker is asking for in those types of questions. Okay.
Right, great, Charles. We hope that's been helpful, and we wish you all of the best in your preparation for the exams that are coming up mid-year, and yeah, I hope that you're able to go into the exam feeling prepared and ready, and wish you all of the best.
Bye-bye.